Hello and welcome to this part of the video which is going to take you from a grade 4 and 5 answer and show you how to turn it into grade 6. Now, the student who sent me this answer was practicing a really interesting technique which I recommend. They were trying to put a different technique into every sentence. This has forced them to be quite creative. Let's see what I mean. Mellow sunlight illuminates my surroundings and I stop to bask in the warmth of the rays. So starting with an unusual word, having a great verb, bask, that shows you exactly what the character is feeling. Now when they redrafted it, they kept that in because it was so good. Next paragraph. To my side, the miniature wildlife scurries hurriedly around me. With a frog I see being poisonous, peculiar and almost paranoid as it hops to the viridian, vivid, violent shade of green leaf. So you can see this student is really thinking about the vocabulary, using lots of alliteration with the V's and P's. It's slightly over the top, so it doesn't feel natural, which is why it isn't getting higher grades, but the sentence is jam-packed with techniques. And the student is also thinking about starting each sentence with a different word, mellow and to. In the student's rewrite, they've focused on being more precise. To my side, the miniature wildlife scurries around me. Stopping to kneel, I spot a vivid lime frog. The frog's skin is the colour of the forest floor. Now the alliteration sounds much more natural. Fading green mixed with so many browns. It has a really gentle, soothing sound. Propping itself up on the lily pad, the frog puffs out its chest so far it's almost see-through, like overly stretched bubble gum. This is a brilliant simile, it's exactly right. And it fits with the idea of being lime green. We can imagine bubblegum that way. And notice that the students got rid of all those P's with peculiar, poisonous and paranoid, because they realised it was just too much and not properly fitting what the description was about. It was just there to prove, hey look examiner, I'm using alliteration. The next paragraph of the first version was, closing my eyes, I focus on the trickle and twinkle of the enchanting stream far ahead of me. Still carrying on with that idea of peace, which is a great link to what went on before, and that's why they've kept that same paragraph, but they've zoomed in on more detail. Again, notice that each sentence is going to start with a new word, closing, snaking, gazing. We do also have the more normal words like it's and the, but in poor writing those words happen all the time. Good writing, you're thinking about the beginnings of your sentences in order to make them varied and interesting. Snaking through the dense vegetation, the chocolate river ripples and roars. Again, great alliteration which feels natural, and a fantastic use of the word chocolate. Many rivers do churn up a lot of mud and appear chocolate in colour. It also gives us the idea of melted chocolate, which gives us the texture. Its murky surface as smooth as glass, hiding all below the waters beneath. Another simile which works. Gazing up, a quilt of vines and lush leaves hug the forest floor. Another brilliant verb. They're not just filling the forest floor, but they're holding onto it really tightly so that you can't break through easily. Very effective. A canopy of care. So this is another one of those bits of alliteration which is just there to prove you're alliterating. How is the forest a canopy of care? Doesn't really make sense to us. The vines slither down the cliff face like snakes. Really great because it refers back to our early image of the river snaking through the jungle. And then of course the verb slithering works with snakes. The vines are seeking the pool of tepid water below. This is a really good use of the senses without telling us in a sentence it felt warm to the touch, which is laborious, we don't need all that. One word, tepid, does the job. Also notice the sibilance. Face snakes seeking. It creates that hissing sound which we associate with snakes. A really cool use of sibilance. The next paragraph was, winding trees standing tall like brave soldiers tower over me. Really good simile, if the trees are going to be threatening in this description. And an exhausting sigh of wind blows the leaves to and fro, tickling the hairs behind my neck. So that's a good description on its own, but tickling is much less threatening than the idea of trees like soldiers, so it doesn't quite fit together. And we do also get the sense that you're only including this description to prove that you're writing about the senses. It's not actually something that's necessary to the piece as a whole. Let's see how the student improved that. They've decided to put in a paragraph before this piece. The canopy is a thick green blanket. It smothers the jungle until one can hardly breathe due to the oppressive, heavy air. It's suffocating. So now we get the idea of threat, which is going to fit perfectly with the idea of the trees like soldiers. So linking these images together again makes this a grade 6 answer. Well done. Now the trees are standing so firm as if the roots are clinging on to dear life. Well, that is an extra bit of description, but that doesn't quite work with the soldiers being threatening. It would fit if the soldiers were under fire and being destroyed, but that wouldn't work with the tree imagery. So this bit doesn't help. The rainforest erupts into life. A shrill cry of a toucan resonates through the undergrowth, a conductor awakening the sleeping orchestra. Now that is an amazing metaphor. We get the sense immediately that the noise is going to be spread everywhere across the jungle, like an orchestra waking up, where everyone is tuning up so it sounds discordant and violent and uncomfortable. No tune is being played, which is just like all these sounds in the jungle. It's a brilliant, brilliant metaphor, and certainly elevates this part of the answer above grade 6. The ticks, clicks and rattles of a tiny world unseen. Brilliant, brilliant use of alliteration. Ticks, clicks, rattles, tiny. To recreate the sound of the jungle. A cacophony of deafening alarm bells, bringing us back to that sound. It continues with the idea that the bells reverberate and thrum as the storm begins. So that was clear grade 7. Now it loses control a bit. You can tell from the harsh turn of a switch that the wind is touring the forest. Now this doesn't feel natural. It's a really bad idea to put the reader in there with you. Unfortunately, the next bit of description is a metaphor with the wind touring the forest, but it's a gentle metaphor, it's no longer threatening, and it doesn't give us that idea of the storm that the student introduced. So it doesn't work, it doesn't fit together. Destroying my early sights of the majestic woodland. Well, this again is imprecise. We had a tropical forest that was full of vines, and that's not a woodland. Woodland is what we'd expect in our countryside. And the idea that it is majestic is just there to prove you're describing with an adjective. It doesn't actually fit the mood of what's gone before. So the student is losing control over their writing. Now we have another metaphor. The wind's cold hands lazily push me forward, which is a pretty great simile, except for the word lazily, which doesn't fit with the storm. So you have to get rid of lazy to fit the idea of the storm, or you get rid of the storm and keep the idea of lazy. Causing the tree branch leaves to dance from side to side, and also causing the hood of my waterproof jacket to flap annoyingly like an annoying child, bratty and spoilt. So we can see that this description of the jacket doesn't really help us understand the forest, and it's there really to show that you're putting 3 adjectives together, telling us the child is annoying, bratty and spoilt. That's a really good technique, but it's led the student now to start describing the narrator rather than the jungle scene, which kind of suggests that they've run out of ideas. Doesn't feel like everything's joined up properly. Ticking the hairs behind my neck, I crash onto the forest floor, the taste of soaked mud entering my mouth. Great. This again feels like it hasn't happened naturally. Remember, it was a lazy wind. It's just there to give us more senses, the taste of stuff. Now, you'd only do that if the taste is relevant to your description. You don't want to force something in it just to give us that sense. It feels artificial and forced. The old paragraph was, Mother Earth beckons, and I kneel to breathe in her perfume, dancing into my nostrils like fresh coffee grounds. Well, again, this is a nice description, but it's just there to prove you're using the senses. The idea of perfume and Mother Earth works really well, but it doesn't fit with your mouth being full of disgusting mud that we had earlier. Once again, the writing's not fitting together. In the new version, surprisingly Mother Earth feels warm. Breathing in her perfume, the damp floor gives way for my exposed knees. This works better, and I'm really pleased that they've got rid of the word nostrils, which writers hardly ever use, and given us this sentence, Mother Earth smells like fresh coffee grounds. The simile is still original, and it works because we see coffee grounds as brown, which works with the idea of the mud and the chocolate river. The old paragraph was, as I carry on my journey, a growl in my stomach. That's very good. As ferocious as a roaring bloodthirsty lion is just there to prove you're describing, and we've got the animal-like idea from the word growl, so that did the job for you. You don't really need this. Echoes through the now silent jungle is really again just to prove you're using the senses. A hungry stomach actually wouldn't be loud enough to cause this echo, so we know this is a false description just to prove you're being descriptive rather than help the reader picture the scene. In the new paragraph, hungry roars my stomach, further piercing the mood of my walk, echoing through the now silent jungle, the aftermath of the storm. Well, that's the same. It isn't realistic at all. The growling stomach was better actually than a roaring stomach. The old paragraph, a great deafening silence. Eagerly I stumble upon an orange tree with a toothy grin. I excitedly pluck a fruit off the tall exotic tree. Well, we sort of feel that the orange tree has just been introduced into the description in order to give us something else to describe, rather than being a realistic fruit tree you'd find in a forest with vines and toucans. Now, in the rest of the descriptive piece, exactly the same problems occur again and again. You will notice when you read through that the introduction of this orange tree is simply to prove that the student is describing, and another way to get lots of juicy senses in, like tastes and textures, but they don't help the overall description. Even worse, what began as a really interesting description of a forest and then lost a bit of control when it described the person in the forest has now totally lost control when we're having this fantastic description, well, it's not really fantastic at all, of the orange being plucked and eaten from the orange tree. So you can see the whole piece is just a collection of lots of descriptive techniques rather than a coherent whole. So we can see that the communication has definitely been clear, but it hasn't been consistent. What does consistent mean? Well, it's got to be matched to the purpose and the audience, which it hasn't always been. Yes, we've had vocabulary chosen for effect, but a lot of that vocabulary hasn't been sophisticated because it didn't match the purpose and the audience. Some of the writing was really engaging in grade 7, but a lot of the ideas weren't properly connected, especially those around the senses. So the best fit is actually the lower level 3, where the word generally keeps applying, so it's generally effective, generally matched to purpose. So I recommend that you write down 5 things that the video has taught you and then practice with your own piece of writing. Or you might just want to know what a top grade answer looks like, in which case, check out the video appearing now.